technology. Isn't it exciting? Now, we did want to give you a heads up. There is a lot of content that we wanted to go over. And for those of you that have been with us before, you know that when we do these updates, we don't just put the codes on the screen and kind of robotically tell you what they are. We try to give you a little insight and behind the scenes as to why these codes are important and what the changes were, because we want that to be more applicable to your everyday life as a coder or as an administrator, whatever your position is, supervisor, manager. If these codes will be crossing your desk, it's a good idea to have foresight into what's happening for the year. That being said, since we do have a lot of content, I may switch over from showing you the slide to actually letting you see in Find a Code, my favorite encoder to use because of several different reasons, which I'll show you a couple of the perks as we get going. The first thing I want you to know about is how many codes have been changed. It's kind of a light year this year. 487 new codes, revised and changed codes. There were 38 and 36 deleted codes. When we look at the deleted codes, though, we don't really usually talk about them too much because in actuality, it's not like they took the code completely away. What they usually do is take a code that needed to be expanded and they got rid of the base code and put extra characters on it. So that code's deleted, but it has like 12 new codes with extra characters. So we don't spend a lot of time talking about deleted. And the revised and changed, that's usually a little bit of, they kind of try to bulk out the description a little bit more or make some subtle changes in the description to make it easier to understand or not as ambiguous. The important thing to know about Find a Code, though, one of the many things we're going to talk about is that within Find a Code every year, they not only give us the new codes, but they also keep the old new codes, as you'll see under the red box, and then the previous year. So I can go back and look at 2023. That was a really hot year for changes. 21 was a really big year for changes. And that way you can go in and maybe there's a code that you knew that was new, but you couldn't remember what it was, but it was relatable to something that crossed your desk. You can go back and look at that. And it's interesting to see what they make their focus on every year when they pull out these new codes. And as I scanned them, I thought, oh, there's some really interesting ones. Ulcers got a lot of love this year. Now, if you want more information about Find a Code, it's real easy to look them up. It's just findacode.com. And when you go to find the new codes and you click on new right here, it's going to look like this when you bring it up. I'm just going to give you a peek real quick. I'm going to just quickly slide through some of these. Don't get dizzy. Oh, wait, it's not sharing because I shared my screen versus the actual codes. I'll come back and show it to you in a minute. Because let's get started. So these are the new codes that are going to be coming out officially as of October 1st, 2025. The new codes also are available with inclusion terms and other instructions. It's not just the new code and then it doesn't say anything else. They're going to actually put in all the other information. In the past, what they used to do is just give you the ID of the code, the description when it's a new code. So this is kind of nice that they've done that. Another thing that's huge is the common language description. I use this all the time. In fact, I was using it, a couple of them today. One of my favorite ones to use as an example is to just look up E1 1.42, and it not only does it give you the diabetes, but it also gives you the different types of neuropathy that is part of, because there's mononeuropathy and polyneuropathy and so on. And it gives you a description about all of those. so that if I need to give that to a coder, I can just, show them that. And especially if they have a subscription, I can just give them a link. But I can also show that to the clinician and say, look at all the options that we have. And when we look at a common code that you may not have been aware, we can translate for you, but we need that verbiage. And this is what we're given to identify that. The examples that we have from Find a Code is familia hypercholesterolemia, which is quite common. It gives you notice the symptoms and the treatments, because especially with new coders, they don't always know the signs and symptoms of a diagnosis. So they're learning. And then especially in risk adjustment, where you have to be able to draw a link and show meat for that diagnosis, you need to know the signs and symptoms or a specific treatment or a test. And that being said, you can have that all with Find a Code right at your fingertips when you bring up the code, because it's on the main screen with the code. You don't have to go clicking around to find it. Every year, Find a Code adds to the CLDs that they have, but every common code that you're going to be working with, usually on a daily basis, will have that. And some that are less common, you'll be surprised. Instead of going and Googling it, look up the code, and that information that you probably need about the diagnosis to better understand it is right there. So again, it not only does it give you this description, the signs and symptoms, the treatments, maybe some tests or more specificity, but look, it even reiterates a guideline sometimes right there. And these are copywritten by Find a Code. Want to make sure that you give them attribution. The example that they're showing here is hearing loss. And notice that they're telling you type 1, 2, and 3. So if you're looking at a note and the clinician wrote, type 2 hearing loss, you're not going to necessarily know what that is. But if you come in here and look up the code, then it'll tell you it's moderate to severe loss at birth. And this particular one, it doesn't have the parent code there. And then it tells more information about it. And it says, report other when documentation specifies a type which is not available in the code set, or unspecified when it doesn't give you the type, because further testing needs to be done. This is information you need to remember. And so it's good to be right there by the code. Now, for 2026, we're going to jump in and we're going to look at some of the changes in specificity, and then we're going to go look out at Find a Code and see how it's revealed in this extremely easy to use and navigate format that I truly appreciate. And in fact, it's so much fun to go through it. I encourage everybody every year to scan through these new codes this way through Find a Code. So again, you can see what's happening. What was their thought process this year? What body areas or diagnoses did they focus on to elaborate and give more specificity? Because that's usually why we're given new codes. When we look at the changes, we know that they usually want greater specificity, and they'll expand the options for diagnoses. This time they did non-pressure ulcers. We ended up getting over 100 new codes. That is the reason it's so expansive, because remember, with ulcers, we have stages. So for one location, because we have all the locations, we have to have stages in addition. They added a pressure ulcer location, the abdomen this time, and the flank. Normally we don't think about flank, but that is the hip, the costal area, the rib area is what we usually refer to as the flank. So again, when you have severity, that means when one code's deleted, you get a higher specificity, usually location or type. Then you have to put in laterality and all this other stuff. They added to neoplasms, musculoskeletal disorders, and conditions like lipodystrophy and chronic ulcers. Now, for the guidelines, they clarified coding for HIV and conditions that involve multiple sites, and type 2 diabetes in remission. Had you ever thought that we'd get a code for diabetes in remission? I think that's truly amazing. And that lets you understand how our job when we code isn't necessarily about getting paid. And this mantra I tell you guys all the time, it's statistics. We code for statistical purposes. It happens to be a convenient way to get paid. Why do we have these statistics? Because that's how new treatments are developed, focus on the complexity of a patient population. We know that obesity is an issue, diabetes an issue, and if they now can put diabetes in remission, type 2, wow, right? So that's very telling. It's important, though, don't forget that you should review the updated new guidelines, and anything in bold that's not a heading will be something that's changed. Usually it's just little tweaks that they do, though. No major changes, but when they do make major changes, we absolutely let you know. And some of you old timers, it wasn't that long ago, but remember when they went to causal relationships in diabetes? I mean, that kind of blew our minds. Now, another thing about the updates is we have some structural changes. They revise note structures and put additional information in the excludes 1 and exclude 2 notes. And also in Find a Code that I really appreciate is they highlight these in a different color. So the I think use additional code is in yellow, and like a teal sometimes is used for another one. And then the excludes 1 and the excludes 2 are in red. So my eye can navigate to that page when I look at a code really quickly. Also, the conversion tables, the availability of resources. You've got mapping, deleting inactive codes to their replacement. That'll happen in October 1st. So I looked up a code the other day that I had written down, and I typed it in, and it was a deleted code because they'd actually expanded it. And right there next to that code that I brought up was a bar that told me, look, click here and see the expansion. And then it popped up on the next screen, and I had 3 other choices for higher specificity. And my note was, I guess it was that old. It would have been just a year old. Very important that we get these right. Now, most of the time, if we're working and we're typing in codes into our platform, it will alert us that the code isn't a valid code. But if you're making notes or you're educating or you're wanting to send somebody a memo, you want to make sure you have it right and that you don't put a code that's been expanded in a note. I always think that that would make me feel like I'm not very bright. I want to make sure everybody knows that I'm passionate about ICD-10 and I get it right. Some other notable newly added diagnoses codes that we need to be aware of, again, is non-pressure chronic ulcers. These are going to be in chapter 12. I tend to use the first character to think about them, but some people think of them in chapters. We again have over 100 new codes for the L98.4. What they did was they now have non-pressure chronic ulcers by specific site and severity. We've always had that, including abdomen, chest, neck, face, groin, and upper extremities. In the past, we've always had the anatomy that we could say that, it's a foot ulcer, it's a lower extremity ulcer, upper extremity ulcer, but we didn't have a lot of specificity of other major parts of the body. Now, we've probably all seen that diagram where it shows you where the most common pressure ulcers are. They said trunk, but now we have higher specificity. One of those is to be on the neck. Now, I wouldn't have thought about a non-pressure ulcer on the neck. However, when I saw this graphic, and thank you, Mary, and the interns for adding this, think about a person that has a trach. So that could have a wound, or even when it's healing, if it's not healing properly, that's a perfect place to have an ulcer whenever there's a wound. So if you have a diabetic with a wound on the neck, we couldn't really fully describe where that is. And we have better specificity. Why would we need that? Well, let's say that a person had a specific allergy to tape. You have to tape, and it's not easy to keep those tubes in place. And so their skin got irritated, it broke down, and an ulcer developed. We want to be able to describe that. And then next thing you know, they'll be coming out with a new type of tape that can hold those tubes in place that is non-allergenic, I guess. So that's just a quick example, but there's a lot of other reasons. Now, quickly, let's look at how this code is divided up. L98.4, that's the new edition codes. But we have 3.1, which is abdomen, and then limited breakdown of skin. That's the last character. And then it would go on to say the fatty layer, and then necrosis, muscle exposed, bone, and stuff. It would continue on there. But we have abdomen, neck, and groin. So here's 3 examples of how those new codes would look. Pretty exciting, right? And if you're into wound care, this is going to be really pertinent for you. Another area that they added was R codes, which are signs and symptom codes. A new code is R10.2, converted to a parent code for specific types of pelvic and perineal pain. And then we've got cannabis hyperemesis. One of the side effects of cannabis use is you start vomiting. And so that's what hyperemesis is. And it because it's classified as a syndrome, it I guess you could say that it's rather more common than you can think. They actually have a code for that now. So think about how we had to describe that. Cannabis use, nausea and vomiting, or hyperemesis, which didn't necessarily link those. Now we have a link that the reason they have hyperemesis, it's now a syndrome and it's due to cannabis. Then they also added the costovertebral angle tenderness and abnormal immunological findings. I thought that costovertebral was interesting because a lot of people get rib pain, and there's no way to say that in the code set to describe that. And that's kind of a common thing. And if any of you guys have stretched or pulled that rib, you know what that feels like. You know, you could just lean over a certain way, and next thing you know, you got that sharp pain. But again, now we have a way to describe it for signs and symptoms. Another area that had expansion, we now have a new type of breast cancer. We have inflammatory breast cancer. It's not that the cancer is new. We've always had inflammatory breast cancer. We just didn't have a code for it. So now we have C50.A, and that's malignant inflammatory neoplasm of the breast. And then, as always, those codes are expanded into laterality as well as parts of the breast. So you can see how that would mean a lot of extra codes. Now, if you didn't know, this is abbreviated IBC, and I've seen this documented quite a bit. It's rather aggressive, and so we can properly identify it for research. The expansion also happened to Z15.06 now for genetic susceptibility of digestive system malignancies, and now it includes colorectal cancer, which you guys know, if you study cancer, if that crosses your desk, colorectal cancer, if caught early, is one that they can treat and get rid of pretty effectively. The problem is you don't usually have the signs and symptoms until it's progressed. So they have the ability now to look for susceptibility. Why would you want to know that instead of just a family history? If we can look this up, that means that people be prompted to get tested earlier. And there's easier ways than getting tested than there was in the past. In addition, we have some new SDOHs. These are always a big deal. One of the reasons is it changes the E&M leveling for some of our patients. And we want to make sure that we encourage our clinicians to document SDOHs, but sometimes they don't even know what they are and how to do that. So CCO actually has a free tool that we created on the SDOHs. We'll need to update it now that we're going to have some new codes, but that you can put in the packet when the patient comes in, a new patient comes in, and they need to fill out that information. So we now have Z5 9.86 is a new subcode for financial insecurity. That happens all the time for people. It can come in phases in your life, different times in your life. It's to have financial insecurities. And if you have to pay for your medication or you put off going to the doctor because you don't have the copayment even, that's pertinent to your care. There's a new code for exposure to war conflict zones. That is, they now have Gulf War as identified. And I thought that was interesting. We had gotten a few years back different codes, these new Z codes, to identify problems that our veterans were having after a war, and also like terrorism attacks and stuff like that. However, now they have a specific war identified, and that's pertinent because of where it was located. And if somebody was in the burn pits of Afghanistan and exposed to that, then they know that they're having swollen lymph nodes or whatever, that there's a possibility they were exposed and could have this specific type of cancer. Now they can do the same thing for veterans. They know what exposure they could have had to specific antigens or something that could affect their life. So again, it's all statistics so that we can better treat the patient and identify quicker what the diagnosis would be. We also have some new allergy codes, which thrills me because I'm actually allergic to milk. I am not lactose intolerant. I'm allergic to casein, which is the milk protein. And now there's a code for me. Everybody thinks that I'm lactose intolerant, and I'm not. If I drink milk, I break out in spots. So not only did they add new allergy codes for milk products and eggs, but they have a subsection divided up for, are you allergic to milk but not baked products with milk? Or are you allergic to milk and milk baked into products? They did that same thing with eggs. And I thought that was brilliant because, again, some people that are allergic to milk, allergic, not lactose intolerant, if you bake a cake and you put milk in it, they don't have a problem. And other people like me, you know, if I eat a cookie that has milk in it, I'll still have a problem. So that's really exciting. We want to be able to identify that so that we can come up with maybe shots in the future or something that a patient can take. But they also added anaphylaxis. So for these conditions, that's never happened to me. They are not new. These are expanded because of the differences between baked versus fresh tolerances. So that is huge.
Looking for medical coding, medical billing, and risk adjustment education? Learn more at cco.us.